Howdy, this is Mr. Justice, and today we're going to talk about the carbon cycle and ocean acidification. By the end of the process, you should be able to describe the different steps of the carbon cycle and explore how anthropogenic activities can impact biodiversity. All right, so here's a nice definition for the carbon cycle. The carbon cycle is a series of processes by which carbon atoms are converted from one form or another. So take a look at this. I've got a nice example here showing a couple different processes. Notice that the carbon here, the carbon in CO2, well, it's been fixed here into an organic compound called glucose through a process called photosynthesis. So the carbon in carbon dioxide is the same carbon found in the C6H12O6 glucose molecule. Hey, this sugar molecule right here is a source of energy that can be broken down by the mitochondria in plant and animal cells through a process called cellular respiration. And all of the electrons are stripped off of the glucose molecule, used to produce ATP, right? And there's some waste products here, including carbon dioxide. So the carbon here in CO2 was fixed into the carbon here in this organic compound glucose, and then released again in the form of carbon dioxide. So this is an example of two of the different processes of the carbon cycle. So let's begin here. Let's get into photosynthesis and respiration. Right? Photosynthesis and respiration can happen on the land as much as it can happen in aquatic ecosystems too. During photosynthesis, carbon dioxide is converted into sugars, and then respiration occurs when those sugars are converted back into CO2, carbon dioxide. Take a look at this, right? Plants convert light energy along with carbon dioxide and water to create organic carbon-containing compounds like sugar, glucose. And you can see that here in this diagram. Cellular respiration is the process where this glucose is broken down, and it's a pretty complex process here. When oxygen is present, we're able to release all of that energy trapped in the bonds of glucose and produce another form of energy called ATP along with carbon dioxide. So what's interesting about these two cycles here is that the waste products of the mitochondria of respiration, right, carbon dioxide and water, become the ingredients or the reactants for the chloroplast, for plants to take that carbon along with the water, the carbon dioxide along with the water to produce glucose, that organic compound C6H12O6, along with some oxygen too. And note that the products of photosynthesis become now the reactants of cellular respiration. All right, so let's talk about exchange. It's our next of the carbon cycle processes here that we're discussing. Exchange is kind of traditionally a little bit more difficult for students to grasp, and I think it's just because of the name. Take a look. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and carbon dioxide dissolved in the water can exchange at that surface level of really any body of water. It could be just a glass of water on your table or the entire vast ocean. So CO2, gaseous CO2 can dissolve into liquid water, and when that does that, it creates carbonic acid. It reacts with the water to form a different compound here. It's slightly acidic. So let's talk about that here, right? Here's exchange. So you see on the screen the carbon dioxide molecule can dissolve from the atmosphere into the hydrosphere at the surface, and when it does it, again, it reacts with the water to form carbonic acid, according to the equation that you see on the screen. Hey, the H plus ions, these hydrogen ions in water, will dissociate, detach from the CO3, the carbonate ion, right? And so those carbonate ions can be used by coral, by mollusks, by organisms that make calcium carbonate shells, like crabs. Use this carbonate ion for their own self, right? So that they can grow and reproduce properly. So here's the thing, right? Carbon dioxide dissolves into the water. It's a normal process. It produces carbonic acid. You guys actually know carbonic acid. If you've ever drank seltzer water, you're drinking carbonated water, right? Anytime you drink a Coca-Cola or a Pepsi, that tang that you're tasting is the dissolved carbon dioxide in the liquid itself, right? So think about this now on a larger scale here all over the world. Through anthropogenic activities, right, like the burning of fossil fuels and deforestation, is going to increase carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. And that means then, or implies then, that that extra carbon dioxide will dissolve into our ocean, making the ocean just a little bit more acidic, right? Less basic than what it normally would be, causing its pH to drop just a little bit. Take a look. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, the seawater pH was a little bit above 8, slightly basic, right? A little bit more alkaline. After, there's a projection now in the 2100 that the sea level, the sea pH will drop due to this increase of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, right? It's dropping because it's dissolving more readily into the ocean, which is causing more carbonic acid. This process is robbing the carbonate ion from being used by these different marine calcifiers to build shells and coral, right? That becomes an issue. So as we increase the carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, we're decreasing the biodiversity. These crabs, coral, and shells might not necessarily be as many or as plentiful as prior, right? They also might be smaller too as a result because of the lack of those ingredients, so to speak. So take a look. Some of the vegetation here on our world can die. And when that happens, it can be buried over time, hundreds of millions of years. A lot of pressure can turn that organic compound in the dead material that's been buried into fossil fuels, right? A different form of carbon-containing molecule, a hydrocarbon this time. It can also happen, remember the calcium carbonate ions that are in the ocean? Well, that sediment can also settle on the seafloor as well. When it gets covered and pressed due to pressure, it can create different types of sedimentary rock, including limestone. These processes on the carbon cycle are called sedimentation and burial. The next process on our carbon cycle journey here is extraction, and you're seeing that on diagram right here. So remember those hydrocarbons, right? That carbon-containing molecule here of the fossil fuels in the lithosphere. Extraction is the process of mining it, of removing that coal, that oil, that natural gas out of the earth. So that it can be used, right? Oil will be refined and ultimately used as a fuel for vehicles. And which brings us to our last of the carbon cycle processes, combustion. Those fossil fuels, along with really anything that has carbon in it, like the trees that you see on the screen, can undergo combustion processes. That's when plant matter, fossil fuels are converted back into carbon dioxide. Any combustion process, any burning process is going to produce H2O and CO2, carbon dioxide, and there's nowhere else for it to go other than in the atmosphere, and then ultimately into the ocean too. These increases in the increase in carbon dioxide here in our atmosphere is decreasing the ocean's pH, right? So take a look at this diagram here. Think about what these arrows represent. The arrow here with the equal sign is photosynthesis, right? The carbon dioxide would enter into the biosphere, the living vegetative world, right? The vegetation. And then that vegetation, the energy found in that food is released due to respiration. And note that the carbon dioxide that enters into plants and animals is roughly equal to the carbon dioxide that exits through respiration. So there's no real net increase of carbon dioxide as a result of photosynthesis and respiration. Take a look at this. This is exchange on the board here, right? Notice that carbon dioxide can exchange and dissolve out of the ocean just as much as it can dissolve in exchange into the ocean. But notice that there's a little bit more carbon dioxide entering into the ocean than exiting. That becomes an issue if there's a lot more of the carbon dioxide that dissolves in. So where could that extra carbon dioxide come from? It comes from right here, the extraction and combustion processes. That fossil fuels, think about this, in our Earth has been sequestered and stored away almost permanently, right? The only way that fossil fuels in our Earth would be able to get back up into our atmosphere is through an earthquake or a volcanic eruption, right? So that becomes an issue because anthropogenic activities like transportation, the production of really anything here on our Earth, the running of machines and motors, all of that is releasing that carbon that was once stored back up into our atmosphere, increasing and enhancing Earth's greenhouse effect, making temperatures warmer. And I'll tell you, if you are a coral, like the coral here I have in my hand, you are living within a very narrow range of temperature in the ocean. Just 1 or 2 degrees Celsius extra, if you're a coral, probably means death. In addition to the issues with the warming of our global temperatures, that ocean acidification process too is robbing that carbonate ion from coral from continuing to live and thrive to its largest and best ability. All right, so what I'd like you to do in your notes is give me an answer to this carbon cycle FRQ. You can push pause and read it. It's also located on our Canvas class. I hope this was helpful.